Let's start with a short prayer before we get into the lesson.
Okay.
Dear God, please be with us today. Help us understand the message of hope from this lesson and how we can use it in our lives. Amen. I'm really interested in this lesson you shared, A Candle in the Dark. It's about Isaiah's prophecies.
Yes.
It really seems to focus on hope during tough times.
You're right.
Like the synopsis really brings that out.
Yeah, the whole point of this lesson is to show how God offered hope to his people when they were going through some of the hardest times.
And to connect that with the hope we can find in Jesus.
Exactly.
It's amazing when you think about the historical context. Isaiah wasn't speaking to people who were doing well.
No, not at all.
Judah was surrounded by empires. They were
Yes.
losing their connection with God. Their world was falling apart. And then you have Isaiah sharing these prophecies of hope.
It's almost like the opposite of what you'd expect. You'd
Right.
think people would just focus on surviving. But that's what's so powerful about this lesson and Isaiah's message. It shows us that even when everything seems hopeless, there's always some light.
That makes me think of the key text for this lesson. It's Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31.
Oh, yeah.
Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint.
Think about the people hearing those words for the first time. They were probably exhausted, both physically and emotionally. They lost their homeland, their freedoms, everything they knew. And someone comes along and tells them they can soar like eagles.
It's like a total change of perspective.
Absolutely.
I like how the lesson encourages listeners to think about their own experiences. There's that "what do you think" section asks. What Bible promises have helped you during tough times?
Right, because it's not just about history. It's about applying those words to our own lives, our struggles.
Because we all face tough times.
Yeah.
And speaking of insights, I found the "did you know" section really interesting. For example, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2 says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned."
That's beautiful imagery.
It is.
It speaks to our human need to find hope, even when we're surrounded by darkness.
And I really like how the lesson uses the story about American General Robbie Risner.
Oh, yes. His story is amazing. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam.
For 7.5 years.
Can you imagine that?
It's amazing how strong he must have been mentally to handle being captive that long.
And what really gets me is that part about the blade of grass. The one he could see through a tiny hole in his cell.
That tiny thing became a symbol of hope in that horrible situation.
It reminds us that, even when we're surrounded by darkness, we can find strength in the smallest things.
Just like the Israelites would have needed to hold on to any hope they could find.
It's like a parallel, isn't it? Risner finding hope in a blade of grass, and the Israelites finding hope in Isaiah's prophecies.
They both point to a future beyond their suffering. And speaking of those prophecies, the Into the Story section takes us right to them. Chapters 11, 29, and 40 of Isaiah. They really paint a picture of God's promise.
They do. They use such powerful images and language to show that message of hope. Like in Isaiah chapter 11, there's this beautiful metaphor. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit.
It's like a visual representation of hope.
Right. Even when something seems completely destroyed, there's always a chance for new growth, new life.
It would have been so powerful for the Israelites in exile.
They had lost everything, their homeland, their identity. This image would have shown them a glimpse of restoration, a future where their nation could flourish again.
And it's not only about their nation. There's a deeper spiritual meaning, too.
Absolutely. This branch is often understood as a prophecy about the Messiah, pointing towards Jesus, the ultimate source of hope and redemption.
And then there's that incredible part in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 through 9, where it talks about a transformed world. Predators living peacefully with their prey. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat.
It's such a strong image of peace, harmony. Imagine a world where even a child is safe near a dangerous animal.
It's about the ultimate hope that God offers, a world without conflict and suffering. And for the Israelites, that vision of a golden age would have been so comforting.
They were longing for peace, security, a return to a time when they felt safe.
Exactly.
These prophecies gave them a glimpse of that future, a reason to hope, even in their suffering.
Now, the out of the story section really makes you think.
It does.
It asks questions like, what promises did God make to his people in these passages? And what hope would those promises have offered to the Jews, especially when they lost their freedom and homeland?
If you were in their place, An Israelite in exile. What would stand out to you? Which promise would give you the most strength?
That's a hard one. I think the promise of a restored homeland would have been huge.
It would have been, especially with how deeply the Israelites were connected to their land.
Their identity was tied to their land, their history, their faith. Being forced out of their homeland must have been devastating.
It must have been. But the promise of returning, of rebuilding their nation, would have given them something to hold on to.
And it wasn't just about physically returning.
No, there was a spiritual side to it as well. The prophecies also talked about a renewed relationship with God, a return to righteousness and faithfulness. It was a promise of not just a restored homeland, but a restored covenant, a restored sense of who they were as God's people.
And it's interesting how those themes of restoration and renewal keep showing up in the Bible.
Yeah.
Leading up to Jesus.
Exactly.
Jesus represents that ultimate hope for restoration, both for individuals and for all of creation. So these prophecies weren't just for the Israelites. They have a much bigger meaning. They speak to the human desire for hope.
For healing. For a world that's made right. That's the beauty of them. They offer a timeless message that connects with everyone, no matter what culture or time period, whether we're dealing with personal struggles or global crises. These words remind us that even in darkness, there's always hope.
And that hope isn't just wishful thinking. It's based on God's faithfulness and his promises in Scripture.
It's a hope that gives us the strength to face our challenges with courage, knowing we're not alone.
Before we get too deep into these chapters, I want to mention a really powerful quote.
From Prophets and Kings.
Yes. It says, "From the days of Enoch, the promises repeated through patriarchs and prophets had kept alive the hope of his appearing."
Wow. That shows how faith and hope continue through generations. It reminds us that God's promises have helped his people throughout history, offering light during dark times.
And that connection to the past is important. It reminds us that we're part of a bigger story, a story that's been going on for centuries.
A story that points towards the fulfillment of God's promises. You make a good point.
Now I have to read the flashlight quote.
Okay. Which one did you choose?
It's from Prophets and Kings, and it says, "Century after century passed away. Finally the voices of the prophets ceased. The hand of the oppressor was heavy upon Israel. As the Jews departed from God, faith grew dim, and hope well nigh ceased to illuminate the future. But in heaven's council the hour for the coming of Christ had been determined, and when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son." Galatians chapter 4, verse 4.
That's powerful.
It is.
It really sets the scene. The prophets are silent, the people are struggling, hope is fading, and then Jesus arrives.
It's like everything we've been talking about coming together. It shows that even when things seem hopeless, God's plan is still happening.
His promises will come true. This quote leads perfectly into the next part of Isaiah's message. Maybe we should take a break and come back to talk about it.
It sounds good.
Okay. Before the break, we were talking about that flashlight quote from Prophets and Kings.
Yeah, about how God sent his Son even when hope seemed lost.
It's amazing.
And Isaiah's message is a big part of that story of hope.
Exactly. His words are like the foundation for that hope.
Even though he spoke them centuries before Jesus.
And that's what makes A Candle in the Dark so interesting. It's not just about hope as an idea. It's about how that hope played out for real people. You have to put yourself in the place of those Israelites.
That's a good point. It's easy to get lost in the theological details, but we can't forget about the people behind those prophecies.
Right, these weren't just words written down. They were words of comfort for people who needed hope, people who were dealing with loss and fear.
And that's why the promises God made through Isaiah are so important. The out of the story section makes us think about those promises and how they would have impacted the Israelites in exile.
For instance, one of the questions asks, what kind of Messiah is promised in these passages?
That's a big question.
It is. It's not just about some political leader who's going to fix everything.
No, the Messiah Isaiah talks about is much more than that.
He is. He's a figure of justice, a shepherd who gathers his people, a suffering servant who carries the sins of the world.
So there's a deeper spiritual meaning to those promises.
Yes. It's not only about restoring a nation, it's about restoring humanity's connection with God.
Exactly.
And that message goes beyond the historical context. It's about our human desire for healing, for wholeness, for making things right. And that leads us to the last question and out of the story. How are these prophecies relevant today? What hope do they offer for us in 2024?
Now, that's a question everyone has to answer for themselves.
It's easy to think these ancient texts don't matter anymore. But there's something timeless about the themes in Isaiah's prophecies.
You're right. The themes of hope, redemption, and restoration, those speak to our core as human beings. We all want a world where things are fair and peaceful, where there's less suffering.
And even though our lives are different from the Israelites in exile, we still face difficulties and uncertainty.
Absolutely. We live in a world that's often full of darkness. But Isaiah's prophecies show us that even in that darkness, there's light, there's hope.
And that hope isn't just a feeling. It's based on God's love and faithfulness. And it gives us strength to face challenges, knowing we're not alone.
I appreciate how the Further Insights section gives us more context to help us understand these prophecies better.
Yes, like that quote that says, "The promises of God presented through his prophets were the ground of the hope of Israel."
It shows how important those promises were for their faith.
They kept them going during those long years of exile. And those promises are still for us today.
God is still faithful.
He is. His love for us hasn't changed.
But I wanted to mention something that I found interesting in the lesson.
Okay.
The Rabbi 101 section talks about using creative writing as a way to connect with these prophecies.
That's a unique approach.
It is. It's not just reading and analyzing. It's about making it personal. They suggest combining Bible verses with your own words of encouragement to create modern-day prophecies of hope.
It's like bringing those old words to life, making them relevant for us today.
It reminds us that we're not just reading these prophecies. We're supposed to do something with them. Let them change our thoughts and actions.
That's an important reminder.
One thing that strikes me about Isaiah's prophecies is how beautiful they are.
They are full of imagery and metaphors that capture your imagination.
Like in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31, they will soar on wings like eagles. That's not just a random image.
No, it's not.
Eagles are strong, they fly high, they see things clearly. It's a great metaphor for the hope God gives us.
It is. It's like he's saying, even when you feel weak, I'll give you strength. I'll give you a new perspective, a vision of a better future.
That image would have meant a lot to the Israelites. They felt trapped and hopeless, surrounded by empires. But this prophecy told them that their circumstances didn't define them. They had a God who could lift them up, give them the strength to overcome their challenges. It's like the eagle's wings represent rising above our problems and finding hope in something bigger.
Exactly. And that message is important for us today, too. We all have times when we feel overwhelmed, when we lose sight of the bigger picture.
But these prophecies remind us we don't have to stay stuck. God can give us strength to rise above, to see things differently, to embrace new possibilities.
It's good that this lesson plan breaks down the prophecies into smaller parts. It makes them easier to understand.
Like the key text section focuses on a verse that summarizes the theme.
And for this lesson, it's Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31.
The one about soaring on eagle's wings.
Then there's the flashlight section, usually a quote from Prophets and Kings that helps explain the topic.
We've read one already. But there are others throughout the lesson, each offering a different insight.
And then we have the punchlines, which highlight key verses from the lesson to reinforce the main ideas.
They're placed throughout the lesson to keep those key themes in our minds.
And the further insights section goes even deeper, explains the meaning and how to apply the prophecies. It often uses historical and literary perspectives.
It seems like they thought of everything to help us understand and connect with this material. There's something for everyone, whether you're new to Isaiah or have been studying for years.
I think that's what makes this lesson so good. It gives us a way to understand these prophecies, but it also lets us think about them personally.
And it doesn't just give us explanations. It also has activities to help us apply these prophecies to our lives, like the suggestion to pray for each other.
That's a nice way to make the message of hope more personal and to build community. It's about supporting each other and encouraging each other to hold on to hope.
I saw the Connecting to Life section too. It challenges us to use these prophecies in our daily lives by choosing a verse from the lesson.
And another promise from the Bible that gives us hope. It's about taking these words and using them to help us, finding verses that comfort and encourage us.
It's like creating a collection of hope, verses to remind us of God's love and faithfulness.
That's a good way to think about Scripture. It's not just about reading. It's about letting the words change our hearts and minds, guide our actions, and shape our perspectives.
It's about letting the hope from Isaiah's prophecies affect our lives, change how we deal with challenges, and how we treat others.
It's like carrying that hope with us everywhere, shining it on our own paths and the paths of others.
That's powerful.
It is, especially in a world that often feels so dark and uncertain.
This lesson plan goes even further right. It connects these prophecies directly to Jesus.
It does, and that connection is so important.
To really understand what Isaiah's message is all about.
Yeah, these prophecies were spoken centuries before Jesus was even born.
So how does the lesson plan show that these Old Testament words are pointing to Jesus?
Well, it highlights specific passages from Isaiah that have a clear connection to the Messiah. For instance, Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7.
Okay.
Talk about a child born to us, a son given to us, and listen to his titles: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
Those are powerful titles.
They are, and they definitely fit with how Christians understand Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God. And the lesson goes even further. It uses quotes from the New Testament that link Isaiah's prophecies directly to Jesus, like Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship.
It's like putting a puzzle together.
Isn't it?
You have these ancient prophecies, but then centuries later, Jesus comes, fulfilling them in ways no one could have imagined.
It's this amazing connection that runs through the whole Bible. It shows how deep and complex God's plan is, a plan that unfolds over generations and ultimately leads to the redemption we find in Jesus Christ.
So it's not just about understanding the history of these prophecies, it's about seeing how they point to something bigger, something that affects all of humanity.
You got it.
And that brings us back to the main theme of this lesson, finding hope when things are dark.
But now we're seeing that hope through Jesus.
And that changes everything.
It does. It's not just about Israel being restored. It's about the redemption of everyone. That's a powerful way to think about it. And it's a message that speaks to everyone, no matter who they are or when they lived. It's a message about hope and salvation for everyone who believes.
This lesson plan does a really good job of balancing the historical context with how we can apply it to our own lives. It's not just about abstract ideas. It makes us think about how these prophecies relate to us.
That's where the "what do you think" section comes in. It encourages people to think about their own experiences with hope, times when they felt lost or discouraged, and how God's promises help them through those times. It reminds us that these prophecies aren't just ancient history. They're living words that can help us today. And they make us think about what hope really is. Is it just waiting for things to get better? Or is it something that gives us the power to face our problems?
That's a great question.
I think Isaiah's prophecies show us that true hope is not just about waiting for a future rescue. It's about finding strength and purpose right now. It's about trusting God, even when we don't know what's going to happen. That idea really connects with our experience as humans. We all have times when we feel lost and unsure, when we don't know what to do.
But those prophecies tell us we don't have to go through those times alone. God is with us. He guides us. He gives us hope and strength.
And it's not just about us as individuals. These prophecies also make us think about how we can bring hope to others.
That's powerful.
It is. We're called to share God's grace and compassion, to be beacons of hope in a world that needs it so much. That's a great message to leave our listeners with. We're not just supposed to receive hope, we're supposed to live it out, to share it, to let it change the world.
I agree completely. So as we finish this discussion, I encourage everyone to think about what we've talked about. Go back and read those passages from Isaiah. Let them really sink in. And ask yourself how they apply to your life.
Don't be afraid to ask those tough questions. What does it mean to have hope in the middle of darkness? How can you be that hope in your own life and for others?
Those are questions we all need to think about. And I think Isaiah's prophecies can give us wisdom and guidance.
It's been great exploring these prophecies with you and with our listeners. May we all be inspired to take that hope into the world and light the way to a better future.
That was beautifully said. And to our listeners, thank you for being here with us. May you find hope, strength, and purpose in Isaiah's words. And may you be a source of light for those around you.